In the fading light of the Old West, where the land remembers more than men do, there rode a cowboy who outlived his time. They called him Henry, a man made of dust, silence, and memories too heavy for one heart. For years, he rode alone, chasing sunsets that never waited, carrying ghosts that never spoke. But one cold evening, a lost boy crossed his path, and in that moment, the West gave him something he thought was gone forever: purpose. This is their story of loneliness and redemption, of love left behind and hope found again beneath the same endless sky. So sit back, friend, listen close, 'cause out here, even the silence has something to say. The wind that morning came from the north, dry and sharp, carrying the smell of sand and juniper. Henry woke before the sun, same as he had for 50 years. He didn't set an alarm. The silence of the plains was its own kind of clock. The rooster had long stopped crowing. Coyotes took him months ago, but the habit stayed. He rose, buttoned the same faded denim shirt, and poured black coffee into a tin cup that rattled a little in his trembling hand. His cabin stood where the prairie opened wide, nothing but the horizon to the east and the bones of old mountains to the west. There used to be neighbors, other ranchers, other men who'd wave their hats when they rode by. Now it was just him, the wind, and the dust. They called him Old Henry in town, though nobody really knew his age. 72, 75, maybe more. He'd lost count, same way he'd lost track of how many winters he'd seen. What mattered wasn't the number, it was the ride. After breakfast, he walked out to the barn. His boots made that hollow sound on the wood floor, a rhythm he knew better than music. Inside waited his horse, or rather, his last horse, an old gray mare named Daisy, too tired to run but too loyal to leave. Henry brushed her slow, gentle strokes that raised little clouds of dust. "Still with me, girl," he whispered. The horse snorted, like she understood. He saddled her, even though there was nowhere to go. The mail didn't come anymore. The saloon had closed, and the ranchers' meeting hall had burned down 2 summers back. But he rode anyway. A cowboy without a destination was still a cowboy. Out on the open field, the sky stretched so wide it made you feel small, like a prayer whispered into eternity. Henry liked that. He liked knowing there were things bigger than his regrets. As Daisy walked along the trail, his mind wandered to the woman he'd once loved, Martha, to the letter she'd sent 30 years ago, saying she couldn't wait for him anymore. He'd never written back. What could he have said that he loved her, but loved the land more, that he didn't know how to be anything but a man on horseback? The wind carried the sound of her name sometimes. It sounded like forgiveness, or maybe memory pretending to be kind. He stopped at the old river bend where cottonwoods leaned like tired old men. He dismounted, crouched down, and ran a handful of water through his fingers. Cold, clean, real, still here, he said softly. He wasn't talking to the river. When he looked up, the sunlight caught the ridge in a way that made everything glow gold. For a moment, he felt young again, the world unbroken, time generous. Then Daisy neighed, and the spell broke. He mounted back up, turned toward home. On the way, he passed the ruins of the Thompson place, an old ranch that had gone empty after the drought, fences fallen, barn half collapsed, a swing still hanging on the porch, creaking in the wind. He remembered the laughter of the Thompson kids, how they used to chase chickens and wave when he rode by, They'd all gone east years ago. Most people had. By noon, he was back at the cabin. He unsaddled Daisy, gave her some oats, and sat down on the porch. The wood creaked under his weight. In the distance, a hawk circled. Nothing else moved. He sipped water and thought, not for the first time, that maybe the West was fading, not the land but the way people lived on it, the code, the quiet pride, the respect between men who said little but meant much these days. Even the cowboys on TV wore clean shirts and smiled too much. The old man chuckled dryly. "The West ain't what it used to be," he murmured. As the afternoon sun began to slide down, a strange thing happened. He thought he saw movement down by the dry creek bed, just a flicker. A shadow that didn't belong to any animal he knew. Maybe his eyes playing tricks again. But then he heard it, a sound that didn't fit the wind or the birds. A cough, soft, human. Henry stood up, squinting against the glare. Nothing. Then another cough, closer. He reached for the rifle leaning against the doorframe, the same one his father had carried through the war. He waited. A few minutes later, from behind the tumbleweeds, came a boy, barefoot, dirt on his face, maybe 10, maybe 11, his eyes wide, scared, wild, like a trapped animal. He froze when he saw Henry. "Easy, son," the old man said, lowering the rifle. The boy didn't move. "You lost a nod, barely. Got a name, Silence." Henry sighed, looked around. No tracks but the boy's small feet. No wagon, no horse. He could tell right away whoever brought him here wasn't coming back. "Come on, then," Henry said quietly. "You look hungry." The boy hesitated, then took one slow step forward. The old man turned toward the cabin, pushing the door open. The smell of coffee and dust filled the air. Inside, the light was dim, warm. As he poured water into a tin cup for the boy, Henry realized he hadn't spoken that many words in a single day for years. Maybe this was the start of something, maybe not. But as the boy drank, the wind outside softened, and for the first time in a long while, the cabin didn't feel so empty yet. Morning came slow over the plains, soft and pale. Henry woke to the sound of a spoon clinking against tin. For a second, he thought he was dreaming. It had been years since there had been another sound in the cabin besides wind and creaking wood. The boy was standing by the stove, holding the pot with both hands, trying to pour coffee into a cup too big for him. Half of it spilled on the table. Henry didn't scold him, he just watched. There was something about the boy cautious, quiet, like a wild animal still deciding if it could trust you. Henry remembered being that way once, a long time ago. "You got a name, son?" he asked finally. The boy hesitated, then whispered, "Sam, just that. No last name, no story." Henry nodded slowly. "Sam. Huh. All right, then." He took a sip of coffee, grimaced bitter and burned, but he drank it anyway. The boy watched him like every movement mattered. After breakfast, Henry grabbed his hat and motioned to the door. "Come on," he said. "You ever been on a horse before?" Sam shook his head. "Well," Henry said, "today's as good a day as any." Outside, the sun had climbed high enough to paint the world gold. Dust shimmered in the air like old ghosts. Daisy waited by the fence, tail swishing. She lifted her head when she saw Henry, as if saying, "About time." Henry walked over, patted her neck. "We got company today, girl." He turned to Sam. "She's gentle, but she don't like sudden moves. Same as people." The boy nodded. wide-eyed. Henry knelt beside him, his knees cracking, hand on her nose first. Let her smell you. Tells her you mean no harm. Sam did as he was told, trembling a little. Daisy snorted softly, accepted him. Henry smiled, not much, just a corner of his mouth. See that she likes you already. He helped the boy up onto the saddle. Daisy shifted, but didn't spook. Sam grabbed the horn tight, knuckles white. Don't fight her, Henry said. You lead with your legs, not your fear. He took the reins, led them slow down the dusty path behind the cabin. The wind carried the smell of sage and old wood smoke. The boy was silent, soaking in every sound the creak of leather, the whisper of grass, the rhythm of hooves on dirt. For Henry, it felt like stepping into a memory he thought he'd buried. He'd taught another kid to ride once, his nephew, back when his brother was still alive. That was 40 years ago. The boy had gone east, never looked back. Sam glanced down at him. How old's she, Daisy? Henry smiled faintly. Older than both of us put together. The boy laughed, a small sound, but bright. Henry realized he hadn't heard laughter in this yard for decades. They rode for a while in silence, following the trail that wound along the creek bed. Birds skimmed the water, the air humming with life. For the first time in years, Henry didn't feel the weight of the miles. After a long stretch, they stopped under a cottonwood. Henry sat down on a rock, pulled a piece of jerky from his pocket, handed half to the boy. Sam took it carefully, as if it were something precious. Where you from? Henry asked. The boy chewed. Swallowed. Don't know. We were in a wagon, then... Iboui, horses running. I woke up. They were gone. Henry nodded. He didn't press. There were things a man shouldn't force out of another's mouth. Grief had its own timing. Well, Henry said after a while, you can stay here till you figure it out. The boy looked at him, uncertain. Really, I ain't got much, but I got space, and an extra plate. Sam smiled, small but real. They rode back as the sun began to fall, long shadows crawling across the land. The sky turned from gold to red, then to the soft blue of dusk. Henry felt the chill settle in his bones, but it didn't bother him. That night, they sat by the fire outside. Henry strummed an old guitar, its strings dull and tired. He didn't play a song, just let the notes drift into the wind. Sam sat close, eyes heavy but shining with that kind of quiet trust that takes a lifetime to earn. You ever been scared out here? The boy asked. Henry thought for a while. Scared, sure, plenty, but fear's like a storm. Son, you can't stop it. You just ride it out. Keep your hat down. Keep your horse steady. It passes. The boy nodded, staring at the flames. Henry leaned back, eyes on the stars. Thing about fear is, it don't kill you. Loneliness does. Sam didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both understood. The wind shifted, gentle this time, carried the smell of rain far away. Henry looked at the boy, small and thin, wrapped in an old blanket, already drifting off to sleep. And in that quiet moment, under that wide western sky, the old cowboy felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, not just memory, not just duty. It was purpose. Maybe that's all a man ever really needs, someone to teach, someone to care for, a reason to saddle up one more morning. Henry tossed another log on the fire, watched the sparks rise like prayers. For the first time in decades, he whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for sending me this kid." Daisy shifted in her sleep. The fire cracked, and the west cold, wild, endless, felt a little less empty that night. The first light of dawn crept over the hills, painting the prairie in gold and ash. Henry stood by the fence, hammer in hand, squinting at the horizon the way men do when they've spent their whole lives watching the weather. Behind him, Sam shuffled out of the cabin, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Breakfast first," Henry said, not turning. "Then we mend that fence before the sun gets mean." The boy nodded. No questions, no complaints. He'd learned quickly that on the prairie, talk was something you spent sparingly. They ate in silence, biscuits hard as saddle leather and black coffee thin as creek water, the kind of meal that kept you humble. When they started working, the land was still cool. Henry showed Sam how to lift the wire without cutting his palms, how to twist it just right so it'd hold through the next storm. Every task came with a story, not long, not fancy, just the kind passed down from men who built their lives out of dust and muscle. "You see that post?" Henry said. "Been there longer than you've been alive. Storms took half the fence, but that post stayed. You know why?" Sam shook his head. "'Cause it just never fights the wind head on. Things that don't bend, they break." The boy nodded, storing the words away. Henry didn't say much more. He didn't need to. Out there, the land did most of the teaching. By noon, sweat darkened their shirts. The boy's small hands were raw, but he didn't stop. Henry watched him quietly, remembering himself at that age stubborn, too proud to admit when he was tired. He smiled under his breath. "Take 5, he said, handing Sam a canteen. "Even God rested once in a while." They sat under a cottonwood, the air thick with the smell of dust and sunlight. The boy sipped water, looked up. "How come you live out here alone?" Henry's eyes followed a hawk drifting overhead. It took him a long moment to answer. "Wasn't always alone." He said finally, "Had a wife once, Martha. She liked piano music, hated the smell of horses, said I spent more time on the trail than in her heart." He chuckled, low and dry. She wasn't wrong. Sam was quiet. He didn't know what to say. "She left." Henry continued, "Went east, married someone who liked clean boots." He looked down at his hands, calloused, cracked, permanent reminders of a life he'd never trade, yet always wondered about. After a while, he added, "Some things you lose 'cause you don't fight for 'em. Others you lose 'cause you fight too hard to keep 'em." The boy looked at him with that wajid, honest stare only kids have. "You ever see her again?" Henry shook his head. "No, but I still talk to her sometimes. Land's big enough to carry a man's regrets without complaining." They went back to work. By the time they finished, the sun was a burning coin in the sky. Henry stood back, inspected the fence, straight, strong, steady. "Good work," he said. Sam smiled, a flash of pride lighting his face. That afternoon, they rode out to check the far pasture. The grass there grew thick, yellow at the tips, and the wind sang through it like a hymn. Henry pointed out the signs only an old cowboy would notice: a coyote trail, a broken hoof print, the way clouds told you when to turn home. "You listen to the land long enough," he said. "It talks back." Sam laughed. What's it say now?" Henry tilted his hat back. "Says we got about 2 hours before the rain." The boy looked up, sky still blue. "How can you tell?" "You don't look at the sky," Henry said. "You smell it. You feel it in your bones before you see it in your eyes." And sure enough, by the time they reached the ridge, dark clouds rolled in from the west, Thunder rumbled low, like the growl of some old beast waking up. "Ride!" Henry shouted. They pushed Daisy hard, wind tearing at their clothes. The rain hit cold, fierce, soaking them to the bone. By the time they reached the cabin, both were dripping and laughing, breathless. Henry tossed his hat aside and stared at the boy, who stood grinning, hair plastered to his forehead. "You ain't afraid of storms, huh?" Sam shook his head. "You said don't fight the wind." Henry laughed, deep and genuine. It sounded strange in his own ears. They built a fire, hung their clothes to dry. Outside, the storm raged, lightning slicing the sky, rain drumming the roof. Inside, the world was small, warm, and alive. Henry poured them each a bit of warm milk, a luxury he rarely bothered with before. Sam sat close to the fire, eyes half closed, listening. "Mr. Henry," he said softly, "do you ever wish you'd gone east too?" The old man thought about it, about Martha, about the towns he never visited, the letters he never wrote. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but then I remember the East don't have skies like this, and a man's got to live where his heart can breathe." The rain softened. It became a steady whisper. Henry leaned back, eyes on the flames. "You know, Sam, life ain't so different from this land. It gives and it takes. It's harsh, but fair, if you respect it." The boy nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the fire. "And what if you don't?" he asked. Henry smiled faintly. "Then it'll break you, same as it's broken every man who thought he could own it instead of belong to it." The storm passed before midnight, leaving the air clean and heavy with promise. Henry stepped outside for a moment, breathing deep. The stars had returned, brighter than before, as if the sky itself had forgiven the earth. Inside, Sam slept by the fire, curled under an old wool blanket. Henry watched him a long time, then whispered, "You're learning fast, kid, faster than I did." He looked out at the land stretching endless and quiet, and for the first time in years, he felt something like peace, not the kind you find in stillness, but the kind you earn by sharing it. The storm had left the world washed clean for 2 days. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. The prairie glistened under the soft light, every blade of grass heavy with dew, every rock dark and shining. Henry spent the morning fixing the barn roof, humming an old tune that Martha used to play on the porch piano. He didn't even realize he was doing it until Sam spoke up from below. "That's a song." Henry froze. "Hammer in midair, used to be," he said quietly, "long time ago." Sam tilted his head. "Who taught you?" Henry smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Someone I should have listened to more." The boy didn't ask more questions. He had learned by now that certain words belonged to silence, not speech. Later that day, while cleaning the old chest at the corner of the cabin, Sam found something, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, edges brittle. He turned it over carefully. No envelope, just a single word written in faded ink: Henry. He hesitated, then brought it to the old man. Henry was sitting by the fire, sharpening his knife. When he saw the paper, his hands went still. "Where'd you find that?" "In the box. I thought it was yours." Henry took it slowly, like it might fall apart at his touch. For a long while, he just stared at it. Then, without a word, he unfolded it. The handwriting was small, neat, and familiar. He didn't need to read the name at the bottom. Martha. His breath caught in his chest. The boy watched quietly, unsure if he should leave or stay. Henry began to read aloud not because he wanted to, but because somehow the words needed to be spoken, needed to fill the room that had been silent too long. Dear Henry, I waited through 2 winters and a war of my own heart. I thought maybe you'd ride home. Maybe the wind would bring your voice with it, but the land always came first for you. Didn't it the cattle, the sky? The trail they spoke louder than I ever could. If you ever read this, I hope you understand I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I couldn't stand watching you disappear piece by piece into that endless horizon. Maybe one day you'll forgive me. Maybe one day you'll come back. But if you don't, know this: I never stopped looking west when the sun went down. Yours always, Martha. Henry's voice cracked near the end. He folded the letter slowly, set it on the table beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fire popped softly, throwing orange light against the walls. Sam finally said, "You loved her." Henry nodded. "I did, more than I ever said out loud." He leaned back, eyes lost in the flames. "You spend your youth thinking you got time. But time's a funny thing. It don't take your memories, just the chances you never took." The boy frowned. "You think she's still alive?" Henry gave a small laugh, not mocking, just tired. If she is, she'd be near 80 now, maybe sitting somewhere with a cup of tea, wondering why old fools like me can't let go. Sam hesitated, then asked, "You gonna write her back?" The old man looked at the letter again, fingers trembling slightly. "Some words come too late, son. But maybe they still matter to the one saying 'em." He stood, walked to the small desk in the corner. It hadn't been used in years. Dust covered everything. He brushed it off, sat down, and pulled out a sheet of paper. The boy stayed quiet, watching as the pen scratched slow across the page. "Dear Martha, the West kept me longer than I meant to stay. I thought I could outlive loneliness. But I learned a man don't outlive the things he runs from, he just circles 'em till they catch up. I ain't sure where you are now, or if this'll ever reach you, but I found your letter today. It's been waitin' for me in a box, same as the years I never opened. You were right, I belonged more to the land than to love. Maybe that's why God sent me this boy, to remind me what it's like to care for something fragile again. If heaven's kind, I'll get to tell you all this proper one day. Till then, I'll keep riding west not to find you, but to forgive myself. Yours still, Henry?" When he finished, he folded the paper neatly, tied it with the same ribbon from Martha's old letter, and set both on the mantel. Sam asked softly, "You gonna send it?" Henry smiled faintly. "Nah, some words ain't meant to travel. They just need to rest where the truth finally found 'em." Outside, the sky was burning gold, evening falling across the plains like a slow, tender goodbye. Henry walked out to the porch, the boy following behind. The wind was soft again, carrying the scent of sage and wet earth. "You see that sunset," Henry said. "She used to say it looked like the world catching fire before turning calm again. Guess she was right." Sam nodded, eyes wide at the blaze of colors. "The thing about the West," Henry continued, "it don't forgive, but it don't forget neither, and maybe that's mercy enough for old men like me." They stood there a long while, just watching, 2 silhouettes against an endless horizon one old, one young, both learning, in their own quiet way, what it meant to live with loss and still keep riding. As the last light faded, Henry said under his breath, "Good night, Martha." And for a moment, the wind answered soft, warm, like a whisper carried home. 3 weeks passed after the storm. The prairie settled back into its quiet rhythm sunrise, dust, wind, and chores. Henry had begun to forget what life felt like before the boy arrived. The cabin no longer echoed when he spoke. The mornings no longer felt like waiting for something that never came. Sam had grown stronger. His hands, once soft and unsure, were now rough with calluses. He could saddle Daisy by himself, mend a fence without cutting his palms, and light a fire even when the wind fought him. Henry watched him with quiet pride. Though he never said the words, some things were better shown than spoken. That morning, the sky was strange gray at the edges, but clear in the middle, like it couldn't decide whether to rain or shine. Henry noticed the dust first, a faint swirl far off on the trail, moving slow. A rider. He narrowed his eyes, shielding them against the glare. The figure grew clearer. A horse, dark bay, carrying a man in a long brown coat. Sam looked up from the water trough. Someone coming. Henry nodded. Seems so. Visitors were rare. Folks didn't ride this far unless they had reason. By the time the man reached the gate, his horse was lathered, eyes wild. He reined in and tipped his hat. "You Henry Coleman?" he asked. Henry's grip tightened on the fence rail. That name hadn't been spoken out loud in years. "Who's askin'?" "Name's Carter, sheriff out of Dry Creek, lookin' for a boy." He glanced past Henry toward Sam. "'Bout yeah, hi. Name's Sam Reed." The boy froze. Henry's voice came steady, though his heart began to hammer. "What for?" Carter dismounted slowly. "Found a wagon 3 weeks ago. Halfway burned. 2 folks dead. Looks like his folks. Been searchin' since. Town's got kin that'll take him in." Sam's face went pale. He took a step back, shaking his head. "I don't want to go." The sheriff sighed. "Son, they're worried sick in town. You don't belong out here." Henry looked at the boy, the fear in his eyes. The same fear he once saw in himself, years ago, when the world took more than it gave. He turned to Carter. "He's safe here. Eats, works, learns. He's fine." "That may be," the sheriff said, "but the law's the law. You ain't his kin." Henry felt something heavy settle in his chest. "Mind if we talk inside?" Carter nodded. Inside the cabin, the sheriff took off his hat, glanced around the fire, the coffee pot, the letters on the mantel, everything neat, lived in. "You been alone long?" he asked quietly. "Long enough," Henry replied, "till him." Carter studied his face. "Boy's lucky you found him. Could have died out there. But you know how this goes. Folks in town got papers, names, church records." Henry poured him coffee. "Papers don't raise a boy. Men do." Carter looked down at his cup. "Still, can't change what's right." Outside, Sam stood near Daisy, stroking her neck, whispering something only she could hear. Henry walked out, slow and tired, the way a man moves when he's already fighting a losing battle. "Sam," he said gently, "you got kin in town, blood." "I don't care," the boy said. "They weren't there when my ma and pa died. You were—" Henry swallowed hard, Sometimes life don't give you what you want. It gives you what it thinks you need. Sam's eyes filled. Then why's it taken me away? Henry crouched beside him. 'Cause it ain't taking you away, son. It's just showing you the rest of the road. You got to ride some of it without me. The boy shook his head. I'll run. No, Henry said softly. You won't. You're braver than that. You'll go like a man. Carter waited by the horse, uneasy. Henry turned to him. Give me a moment. The sheriff nodded, stepped aside. Henry led Sam to the porch, where the sunset was beginning slow. Gold, same as every night they'd shared. He put a hand on the boy's shoulder. Remember the fence post I told you about, the one that bends? Never breaks. Sam sniffed. Yeah. That's you now. You bend, you don't break. Life'll throw wind your way, but you hold. He took off his hat, placed it on the boy's head. It slid down past his eyebrows. You keep this. It's seen more storms than most men. The boy clung to him for a long time, then finally let go. Carter helped him mount the horse. Henry stood still, hatless, watching. When they started down the trail, Sam turned once, shouted, I'll come back. Henry raised a hand, not trusting his voice. The dust swallowed them. The cabin felt different that night, too quiet, too clean. Henry sat by the fire, staring at the empty chair. Daisy shifted restlessly outside, as if she, too, missed the laughter. He reached for the mantle. The two letters, Martha's and his, lay side by side, beside them now. He placed the boy's hat ribbon he'd found earlier, tied around a scrap of cloth. Family, he murmured, comes in all shapes, don't it? He stepped outside. The stars bright and endless. The wind was gentle again, carrying the faint echo of hoofbeats far away. Henry smiled to himself, not a smile of joy, but of understanding. Some things you love, you keep others. You set free, hoping the trail brings them back when they're ready. And as he looked west, the old cowboy felt peace, thin and fleeting, but real, like the hush after a storm, like the sound of a boy's laughter carried on the wind. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell before Thanksgiving. Soft at first, then heavy, piling up against the fence posts until the land itself seemed to disappear beneath a white silence. Henry woke every morning to the sound of the wind pushing against the cabin walls. The fire burned slow, the woodpile shrinking faster than he liked. For the first time in months, the place felt empty again. No small footsteps in the dirt. No quiet laughter when the stew boiled too long. No boy humming off-key while brushing Daisy's mane. Just the creak of old timber and the lonely sigh of the plains. He tried to keep busy chopping wood, fixing tools that didn't need fixing, riding Daisy short distances to keep her strong, but the cold made everything slower, heavier, even time. Sometimes he'd find himself looking toward the trail, half expecting a small figure to come running down it, hat too big, grin too wide, but only the snow moved. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the ridge, Henry sat by the fire reading the old letters again. Martha's words had softened with age. The paper yellowed, the ink almost gone. He could have recited it by heart, but he read it anyway like a prayer, like a promise he still didn't know how to keep. Outside, the wind howled low and deep. Daisy stirred in the barn, uneasy. Henry threw another log on the fire, the sparks floating upward like tiny stars, and murmured, "Don't worry, girl. We've been through worse." Days blended into each other. When the snow got too deep, He stopped riding. He took to carving small figures out of wood horses, fence posts, even a little boy with a hat too big for his head. They lined the shelf above the fire, each one shaped from memory. He didn't talk much anymore, except to Daisy and the ghosts that lived quietly in his thoughts. Sometimes, late at night, he'd hear voices in the wind, Sam's laughter, Martha's song, the echoes of everything he'd lost but somehow still carried. He'd close his eyes and let them fill the room until sleep came like mercy. One afternoon, after a long storm, the snow finally broke. Sunlight spilled across the plains, dazzling, clean, and cruelly beautiful. Henry stepped outside, squinting at the brightness. The air bit at his face, but it felt good, real. He shoveled the path to the barn, humming that same tune Martha loved. When he opened the barn door, Daisy nickered softly. "Hey, old girl," he said, brushing her neck. "You and me still kickin', huh?" Her breath steamed in the cold, her eyes kind but tired. Henry leaned his forehead against her. "You rest easy. Spring'll come again. It always does." That night, as the wind died down, he sat by the fire, lost in thought. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a small tin box. Inside was the letter he'd written to Martha, the one he'd never sent, and a single folded scrap of paper. On it, in Sam's shaky handwriting, were 3 words, "See you soon." Henry smiled. "You better keep that promise, kid." He set the paper down beside the others, then leaned back in his chair. The fire crackled softly. He felt the kind of tired that doesn't come from work, but from remembering too much. He thought of all the winters he'd seen, each one taking something, giving something. This one felt different, quieter, not cruel, just final in its peace. As the night deepened, the wind stopped altogether. The world outside was still, so still that the sound of his heartbeat filled the room. Henry closed his eyes, listening. He thought he heard hoofbeats far away, soft, steady, coming closer. He smiled. "Guess I'm dreamin'." But the sound didn't fade. It grew louder, clearer, the slow rhythm of a horse walking through snow. Henry stood, heart pounding. He opened the door. The cold rushed in, biting sharp. For a moment, there was nothing but white. Then, through the blur of snowflakes, came a small figure on horseback. A boy, hat pulled low, scarf wrapped tight. "Sam." Henry blinked hard, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks again. But then the boy called out, voice breaking with excitement, "Mr. Henry!" The sound hit him like sunlight after a long night. Henry stepped into the snow, boots crunching, tears freezing on his cheeks. When the boy dismounted, they met halfway, a clumsy embrace between an old man and the piece of his heart he thought he'd lost. Sam's breath came in clouds. "The sheriff said I could come back if I worked hard through winter. I saved every dollar to buy this horse." Henry laughed, rough and low. "Looks like she's faster than Daisy, Maybe." The boy grinned, "But Daisy's prettier." The old man shook his head, still smiling. "You are hungry, wee?" Sam nodded, starving. "Then come on in, fire's still warm." They walked back to the cabin, snow crunching behind them, the night closing in gentle and forgiving. Inside, the fire flared bright again as Henry stirred the embers. The boy sat by the hearth, eyes wide, hands stretched to the heat. "You came back," Henry said quietly. Sam looked up. "I told you I would." And in that moment, as the wind sighed softly outside and the stars glowed like a million campfires overhead, Henry realized that the long winter, the one that had lived inside him for years, had finally broken. The snow melted slow that spring, leaving the earth dark and rich again. Grass pushed up through the thaw. The air carried the smell of wet soil and life returning. Henry watched it from the porch every morning, a blanket over his knees, a tin cup of coffee steaming in his hand. Sam was outside most days, mending fences, brushing Daisy, laughing with the kind of freedom only youth could hold. He'd grown taller through the winter, shoulders straighter, eyes sharper. The boy who once trembled at thunder now rode through storms with a grin. Henry couldn't help but smile every time he saw him. That cabin, once quiet as a tomb, was alive again, full of small noises, the slam of a door, the sound of boots on wood, the whistle of a boy who believed the world was kind. But behind that smile, Henry felt something else, the slow, steady ache that came with age. His hands shook more now. The mornings were colder, the nights longer. He'd lived long enough to know when a season was ending, and not just the one outside. One evening, he sat with Sam by the fire. The air smelled of smoke and pine. "You ever been up to Black Ridge?" Henry asked suddenly. Sam looked up. "That the place you can see all the way to the valley?" Henry nodded. "Yep, I used to ride there every spring. Figure it's time you saw it too." The boy grinned. "When do we go?" "Sunrise," Henry said softly. "Best light you'll ever see." They left before dawn. The land was still blue and silver, the sky just beginning to break open at the edges. Henry rode Daisy. Sam rode the young bay mare he'd bought himself. The air was crisp, clean, quiet except for the rhythm of hooves and the occasional call of a crow waking up somewhere in the distance. Sam kept glancing at him. "You sure you're up for the climb?" Henry chuckled. "Son, I've been climbing that ridge since before your granddaddy learned to walk. If I can't do it now, I'll crawl." They reached the halfway point by mid-morning. From there, the world opened wide, miles of open prairie, rolling out like a sea of gold. The sun touched everything with warmth and memory. Henry stopped, breathing heavy, hand resting on his saddle horn. Sam noticed and slowed. "You okay?" "Just old," Henry said with a smile. "Old, but lucky, yes." They rode the last stretch in silence. At the top, the ridge leveled into a flat overlook. The valley stretched below rivers like silver threads, the horizon endless. Henry dismounted slowly, knees stiff, and walked to the edge. The wind tugged at his coat. "This is it," he said. "Black Ridge, where the sky meets everything a man ever was." Sam stood beside him, eyes wide. "It's beautiful." "Yeah," Henry whispered. "She always was." They stood there for a while, just the two of them, the wind and the heartbeat of the West. Finally, Henry spoke. "You see that bend in the river down there?" Sam nodded. "That's where I first kissed Martha. Sunset looked just like this, except I was too young to know what moments like that cost." The boy looked at him, quiet. "You think she can see this too?" Henry smiled faintly. "If heaven's got any sense, it looks just like this place." He turned, looked at Sam. "You know, I used to think the West was about surviving cattle, storms, long rides, but it ain't. It's about belonging, finding a piece of earth that forgives you. The wind softened, as if listening. Sam's eyes glistened. You belong here, Mr. Henry. Henry nodded slowly. Yeah, and maybe, for a while. So do you. They built a small fire at the top, roasted beans straight from the can, and watched the sun climb higher. Henry told stories about outlaws who turned good, horses that outran storms, friends who never came back. The boy listened like the words were gold. After a long silence, Henry said quietly, Sam, when the time comes, promise me something. Anything. Don't stay here forever. This land's got a way of keeping men still. It makes you think roots are the same as wings. They ain't. Sam frowned. I don't understand. Henry smiled gently. You will, one day. He took a deep breath, the kind that fills a man's chest and memory all at once. The air was thinner up here, purer. You know what my pa used to say? He murmured. He said every man gets one last good ride, not the kind with horses, but the kind where your soul finally knows where it's headed. Sam looked at him, confused. You talk like you ain't coming back. Henry chuckled. Lo, I've been riding a long trail. Son, just feels like I'm getting close to the gate. The boy's face tightened. Don't say that. Henry reached out, put a hand on his shoulder. Ain't nothing to fear. Death's just another horizon, same as this one. You ride far enough, and you find the folks waiting on the other side. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the grass like a hymn. Henry looked west one last time. You take care of Daisy when I'm gone. She don't like strangers, but she trusts you. Sam shook his head, tears forming. You'll tell her yourself. Henry smiled softly. Maybe. They stayed until the sun began to fall. Henry mounted slow, pain flashing through his knees, but he didn't mention it. As they rode down the ridge, the light turned golden again, the same gold as every memory that ever mattered. Halfway down, Henry slowed, then stopped. Go on ahead, he said. I'll catch up. Sam hesitated. You sure? Yeah, Henry said, voice calm. Want to watch the sunset from here. The boy nodded, though something in him knew. He rode ahead a short distance. Turned back once, saw the old man sitting tall in the saddle, framed by light. Henry lifted a hand in farewell. Sam lifted his back. The sun dipped low, setting fire to the sky. Henry closed his eyes, the wind cool on his face. He thought of Martha, waiting by the river, of the boy's laughter, of every morning he'd ever lived to see. Guess this is the last ride, old friend, he whispered to Daisy. The horse shifted softly beneath him, steady as ever. As the light faded, Henry smiled. We made it. And somewhere beyond that horizon, where the sky met eternity, he could almost hear Martha's voice, soft, warm, and waiting. Sam reached the bottom of the ridge just as the sun vanished. He waited, but Henry didn't come. When he rode back up, the old man sat still on Daisy's back, head bowed, face peaceful. The reins hung loose, the wind gentle. Sam dismounted, tears falling before he even realized. He stood beside them a long time, hat in hand, whispering, "Thank you." Years later, folks in Dry Creek would talk about the boy who built a small cross up on Black Ridge. Nothing fancy, just wood and rope, facing west. They said he still visited every spring, riding an old gray mare that never seemed to age. They said, if you stood there at sunset, you could hear the faint sound of two riders heading toward the light, one old, one young, their laughter carried forever across the wind. In the heart of the West, every ending's just another sunrise waiting to be seen. Thank you for riding along. If this story touched your heart, tip your hat, hit that like, and ride with us again next week. There's always another tale waiting out where the dust never settles.